Okay, welcome back, everyone. Hope you had a good break and clearly very impactful sessions both by Gianni and by Shivakumar. What I'd like to do in the first 10 minutes of this session is walk you through LHI, the Learning Health Index, a study that we've conducted now in India. As I mentioned earlier, the results are also being released today in Africa and in the Middle East very shortly, and then US and Europe. This session is about the India study and its results from India. The study was undertaken in partnership with NSC, Mercer, and People Matters in India. And in fact, we've got representation both from NSC and Mercer today on our panel. Let me tell you a little bit about the study, and if we can have the slides up. The Learning Health Index is really an attempt to study in detail the learning proficiencies of an organization. And it is in that spirit that we launched this study, recognizing that there are tangible and intangible benefits of being a learning organization. But clearly, there was no guidance or common understanding and agreement on what would that mean. How could we actually improve our learning proficiencies? What action should be taken by an organization? And therefore, we put organization learning health under the scanner and came up with this model. But it was inspired by the work, if you can move to the next slide, please. Inspired by the work that was actually done in the 1990s by Peter Senge. In fact, Peter Senge spoke about the learning disabilities of an organization and the importance of learning health. And his fifth discipline, which was actually systems thinking, is where we took the approach that learning must be considered as a whole. By dealing with learning in parts and by trying to use this band-aid treatment, clearly we were missing an opportunity. We were missing the forest for the trees, as Gianni put it. And then in 2008, Harvard actually wrote a number of articles on learning health. And when we started discussing this concept with organizations around the world that we work with, they found it very interesting and said, would you take the lead in developing a model, a framework in which we can participate and engage and identify which learning proficiencies we need to improve and which are the learning proficiencies that we need to actually work with and play to our strengths on. Next slide, please. So here is the concept of learning health. So learning health is an organization's collective abilities to perform. Ultimately, as I mentioned, learning exists with the primary notion that it must either impact behaviors, a shift in behaviors, or tangible results in the form of performance. EDCA's learning framework is a comprehensive model comprising of 8 proficiencies that include learning strategy and business, impact and measurement, L&D policies and processes, L&D portfolio, learner experience, learning culture, tools and technologies, and L&D competence. So these are the 8 proficiencies that combine together in a whole system fashion. Very important to remember the interrelatedness and the interplay of these proficiencies that combine to conquer to raise standards of performance. And the index is really the Dow Jones of skilling that we've now produced. It's an aggregate of the scores on each of the dimensions of learning health across a 5-point scale. And by scoring these individual dimensions and coming up with a score, each organization is then able to kind of slot itself into a stage of learning health. And we've classified them as ailing. So if you score between 20 and 39, you're ailing. If you score between 40 and 59, you're coping. If you score between 60 and 79, you're developing. And if you score between 80 and 99, you're nourishing. And a perfect elusive score of thriving at 100, which means every dimension you perfectly score on a scale of 100 on 100, which is why I call it elusive, but not impossible. Next slide, please. So Finally, unveiling the results of corporate India for 2021, the score stands at 66 on a scale of 100. In a sense, that would translate to corporate India currently is performing at two-thirds of its potential. In 2020, the score was 67, so the needle really hasn't moved. Having said that, of course, a lot of work has happened by the learning and development community during this last 1 year. But equally so, the new normal has become newer and things have changed very rapidly over the last year owing to the pandemic. When we look at the individual dimensions, the 8 proficiencies that I spoke of, you see that the highest score is learning strategy and business planning, followed by L&D portfolio, and the weakest links, tools and technology, as we saw in 2020, is yet again the weakest link, followed by impact and measurement. And much of our conversation today has been about impact and measurement and Gianni's discourse on how do we get out of this incremental mindset. And really the ask is to be bold and ask for much more, given the criticality of the learning and skilling agenda in organizations. So some key insights, moving to the next slide. And this is what we will base our prime time conversation with our panelists today. Skill gaps create real business gaps. Now, Shiv said, well, learning strategy is a strength. Well, clearly that strength has, in terms of score, moved in from 83 in 2020 to 79 in 2021. Clearly, to keep up with the business mandate, to keep agile, to ensure that we continuously readjust, reprioritize our spend in line with business gaps is a big ask. And the second, clearly, agility, because being agile, given the rapid change as far as skilling is concerned or business requirements is concerned, clearly there's a lot of work to be done in keeping agile. The second area, which is learner engagement, and learner experience is much more than a buzzword today. In fact, it heralds a very different paradigm itself, wherein we are not looking at the conventional ways of learning and development, but really putting the learner in the front seat. And we saw that personalized learning takes front and center, with 77% of organizations already personalizing learner experiences or planning to do it within the next 1 to 2 years. And it is, the 3 golden words. Relevance is the first golden word of learning and development. And relevance can only be established when you keep the focus on the learner and keep his styles, motivations, interests, or her styles, motivation, interests front and center. The second is in terms of application and the opportunity to apply what you have learned. And the third, really the impact, which Gianni spoke of. So what's the impact that we are making by spending all this money within organizations? Moving to the next slide, please. So the third is where digital meets learning. And this is really everything about tools and tech. This is the weakest link, provides the greatest potential and opportunity for organizations to unlock value within an organization, and that too very rapidly. Shiv spoke about the increase in the use of collaboration tools. Now, clearly that itself is an opportunity for the learning and development community. And Josh Bersin coined this term, learning in the flow of work. So can we embed learning in these systems of productivity, in these collaboration tools, where learning and working come together in a seamless and integrated fashion? And finally, what you can't measure, you can't improve. So have we been shy of actually measuring? Do we have the data to make the business case, to ask for a expansion, an exponential jump in the investment to be made? And clearly this too is a weak area that we've seen in our study. Of course, please download the study and go through its findings. With that, I'm very pleased to introduce our very illustrious panelists today: Abhilash Mishra, CEO of NSC Academy; Anand Narayanan, Chief Product Officer at Simply Learn; Seher Ahmed, who joins us actually from Pakistan. Welcome to the panel, Seher. who's the CHRO of Mercer, Amit Das, my friend, who's winning a lot of awards these days and is on every primetime show that is possible, is the CHRO at Bennett and Coleman. Santosh Cherian, head L&D of HDFC Bank. So he's really our specialist, if you may, on learning and development on this panel. And my friend Mohit, who's the only qualified person on the panel by credentials and portfolio to talk on tech. He is the group CTO at the Mahindra Group. With that, thank you once again for being part of this panel. And what I'd like to do is really kick this off by jumping straight to our first act. So we have divided our discussion today in 4 acts. First act being skill gaps create real business gaps. The second, the true north of learner engagement. The third, where digital meets learning. And fourth, you can't improve what you can't measure. Now, clearly, we've seen a lot of data come through. And according to McKinsey, between 400 million to 800 million individuals around the world could be displaced by automation and need to find new jobs by 2030. In fact, 58% of organizations report that closing skill gaps in their companies has become a higher priority since the pandemic began. Let me start with you, Amit. How are you identifying what are the most important skills to train for within your organization?
Sure, Nishchay. First of all, let me thank you for inviting me to this panel. And I'm really delighted, at the same time excited to be amongst these eminent panelists on this very, very relevant topic that we'll be discussing today and listening to each other. So when it comes to the skill gaps and the relevant competencies that as an organization, when we look at, so in the last couple of months, Nishchay, when we were trying to analyze the main reason why organizations floundered every time a crisis like what we have just witnessed or still experiencing hit the business world, we realized that the reason that organizations floundered every time was because they have become progressively fragile. So unless we continuously reinvent our organization with an anti-fragile core, our reactions to future disasters like the current one will be equally dismal. So hence the overarching learning and development objective of today's business is to make organizations future ready and anti-fragile. And we can enable it by being more resilient and at the same time demonstrate proactive responsiveness to withstand any such shock, and more importantly, how we change every time for the better. So investing in learning agility is no longer an option for us, but a necessity in today's world of business. Now, you know that definition of talent today itself has become very volatile. Organizations are not sure of what competencies they are looking for future success. So the so-called success profiles which all of us have grown up with are becoming irrelevant, since the competencies which gave success in the past will no longer be valid going forward in the new normal world of business. So this challenge, I think, is compelling organizations to develop a shared understanding of the future competencies which you are asking. Now, we have to every time reimagine the competencies in a VUCA business landscape, okay, with a new VUCA, which we say vision, understanding, clarity, and agility, to manage as an antidote to manage the actual VUCA of volatile, uncertainty, complex, and ambiguity in terms of business world. So I think at times groups also, when it comes to designing the learning architecture, the organizational priorities are the foundation for identifying the learning interventions which we thought can create a larger impact based on the business context and also the direction of the organization. So it is about linking the learning to the business outcomes as well as the goals and aspirations of the individuals. We also ensure that we identify and include the futuristic competencies in our learning interventions, both from employability point of view and business success. And mind you, we are conscious about the more investments we make on our talent in terms of their learning curve, we also stand the risk of losing the talent to the market. Okay. That's where the employability factor comes in. And that's where what's in it for me comes in for the individual when it comes to the engagement with the learning and development interventions.
So you make a good point, Amit, if I can just butt in there. You make a good point in strengthening the core. And if I can, staying with health, if you did your planks well, you strengthen your core, but yet remain agile in that sense.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Now, it's not a simple ask, right? So you're asking for stability with dynamism. And that's while the core has to be strong, you have to equally be active and agile in that sense to keep up with the business and keep up with the Joneses, if I may say that. Now, the businesses are seeking clarity. The businesses themselves are seeking that clarity. Learning and development is taking the cue, and in some situations, if they are proactive, providing the cue as well by keeping the eyes and ears open. But isn't it a very difficult ask itself to say, okay, so how do you identify those skills? Absolutely. What are you doing differently today, Abhilash? What are you doing differently today that you weren't doing earlier to actually keep up and ensure that you are always hand in glove with businesses?
Fantastic question, and thank you, Amit, for answering and setting up the tone for the question that Nishay asked earlier. And such a pleasure to be here, part of this conversation. Very happy to be the partner to the LHI survey, second year in a row. And congratulations, Nishay, on wonderful outcomes and the effort put by the team. To all the colleagues, I hope everybody in your family and community is safe and healthy. As when Nishay, you shared the question, and as Amit was just speaking, for us, we are part of a large infrastructure institution like NSE, but also we focus on training, learning, development, employability, and skills for the BFSI industry. So probably just putting the lens together on both sides. Now, when you look at these behaviors or skills as the world is changing, I think there are relevant skills needed for relevant place where we are in the career graph. And if I were to just break into entry level, mid career, and senior level colleagues, in the last 1.5 years, if you look at skills that have become very, very common across all these trajectories in career, is simply digital adoption. And be it an early level entry professional in a bank or a financial institution or organization who's doing digital onboarding. The challenge that L&D team, HR teams today have is how do you engage somebody who's coming on afresh from the campus and try to inculcate the values of culture, mission, and vision of the organization in remote environment. You can try to do a digital huddle, but how does it happen when somebody is coming from the outside the organization and somebody who's building a career? Now, a skill which cuts across all these segments is digital skills, adoption, data, appreciation for analytics. All these things have cut across now, and probably what we were thinking would take 3 to 5 years got exponentially, speeded up in last 12 to 15 months. The second is the mid-career. Organizations are getting flatter and flatter. I think more than the functional and the technical skills, today the mid-level managers and professionals are looking at while I'm functionally sound, how do I prepare myself for a senior role? How do I move? Because the organization is getting flatter. Matrix learning, environment. These are critical challenges while we focus mostly on the functional technical part, how the world is behaving. But I think the mid-level managers are facing or professionals are facing this unique challenge. The senior level teams, again, as I said, moving most senior leaders in the industry, of course, the vintage and the age and the experience, they are moved from an analog world to a digital world, where data is the new paradigm, where analytics, the levels of interpretation you have to do for business. Shareholders are questioning, the world is demanding. Earlier you had a product and you were supplying, today you have to generate demand. How do you do that? And that is the challenge the senior leaders face in moving from analog to digital world. Learning curves have to be faster. Secondly, average age of organizations is decreasing with more younger people joining organizations. Even at NSE today, our average age is 28 years because primarily we are a tech platform, while around 15 to 16% of our colleagues have more than 20 years with the organization. So here you have a rich collective wisdom of 20 years plus experience, plus you have average of 28 years who are coming to work. How do you match make that? Is what senior leaders today find a paucity of skills. And is it training? Is it coaching? Is it leadership sessions with senior colleagues in the industry? How do you exchange those ideas? How do you bring that knowledge curve closer to them? And of course, the challenges that the VUCA world has posed to us, which has sped up in last 12 to 18 months. I think what today all of us are facing is not the ROI on learning and development in terms of investment, is the ROI, I keep saying repeatedly on forums, is the return on intention. What do we want to do with the skills that everybody says keep learning, keep getting skills. Where would you apply them is the question. While we can force everybody to learn and develop skills, is there a playground to apply them immediately? Research shows if you don't apply your learning frameworks in a shorter period of time, you will forget that, right? And that's the question that I want to just lay on the conversation table today.
So a couple of important points, right? One, we spoke about strengthening the core. You've spoken about clearly ensuring that we also provide a conducive environment for the application. Because I said one is relevance, the other is application. Anand, I want to actually come to you because this is again bread and butter, and congratulations on that big announcement. LinkedIn data actually, suggests that there are at least 50,000 professional skills in the world. And given that the shelf life of technical skills is now less than 5 years, soft skills are becoming increasingly important as these skills, as these are the skills that actually automation cannot replace. With AI and machine learning, becoming an integral part of work life, although the demand for soft skills and humanity-based professional skills is gaining precedence. And you being one of the leading online training providers with a number of diversified courses, what according to you are the top skills in demand today? What's selling?
Yeah, thanks, Vishnu. First of all, I would like to say thank you for including me. I feel like the Maverick here a little bit, where I'm the only one who doesn't do L&D, so my apologies that I'm going to come with a very Maverick viewpoint to almost every question you ask me. So the first thing I want to call out is that, I think the days of actually separating out digital skills or soft skills are actually going away, right? And I'll give you sort of a Maverick viewpoint here. If you look at anybody learning, whether they're learning a skill or they're trying to get an outcome, there's a sort of short-term or long-term journey they're going after. You never learn data analytics just because you want to learn data analytics. You're learning data analytics because you are a leader and you have to make sense out of data, or you have to figure some insight that you have to do to make your role better, right? So the first assertion I'll put on the table is you're doing any kind of learning with a specific outcome in mind. Whether you know that outcome at that point of time or not explicitly, it's a journey, right? So every single skill you're learning is on that journey to become great in a certain role or outcome that you're learning. So if you start with that, there's another sort of macro, data that we see, and we get about 120,000 data points, learners every year. But we look at what their desires are, what they're trying to achieve on our platform. And what we find is there are sort of what I consider leadership folks who are trying to go closer to digital because they have to learn new skills. And the folks who are deep digital practitioners who realize they have to have the soft skills. So the first thing I'd like to assert is it's not an either or, right? There's a certain proportion and a percentage that you can attribute to these, but it's not an either or. And here's an interesting thing. We talk about machine learning and all these very cutting edge, very interesting topics. Let me give you a little bit of insight into what actually sells the most at Simple and what's growing the most. Business analytics. The very old, very friendly, very simple starting point of where data science and machine learning actually. Then let's ask ourselves a question. Why business analytics of all the topics is really at the top, right? It's because both the practitioners who want to get started on the data science journey and the leaders who want to actually apply data science or the basic data science principles of their job need business analytics, right? That's been growing 200, 250% year over year for us, right? And you look at the other topics that really do well. Yes, of course, data analytics is the next one after business analytics, data science is right after that. You then start getting into cloud, DevOps, machine learning and AI. But the interesting thing to note here is if you look at where people are actually purchasing courses, it's not your deep, super deep tech. Yes, there are people, and that's growing at roughly 80% year over year for us as well. But the ones that actually succeed are the ones that are really at the inflection point of soft skills and digital skills, and are the ones that actually apply in your role directly, right? So the first thing I'd like to say is, I don't think it's an either or. I think the world is starting to blur a little bit. And it's at the confluence of digital skills and soft skills where really the activity is right now. Because people have realized, look, I don't need to be a machine learning engineer to figure out this specific business question I need to answer. I need to know enough to solve the problem. And people have become really pragmatic about that. That's what we are seeing in Simple Learning.
So would you say that as you approach organizations, you see an equal focus and emphasis on both? And I'm still using two sides of the house just to make the point, while the new nomenclature is now composite skills, actually, which is a combination of domain and emerging tech and softer skills. That's really where the focus lies. But where's the money being spent?
Yeah, Nishay, actually, that's a funny thing, right? I'll give you two examples, very specific examples without taking names, right? There are marketing organizations that come to us and say, please digitize our whole marketing team, and we teach them digital marketing. They have the focus on digital skills and technical skills, right? On other side, you have leaders in marketing coming to us saying, look, you have the practitioners coming and saying, look, I understand how to use Facebook and I know how to use TikTok, but I actually don't know how to put a campaign together. Can you teach me basic marketing, right? So it is a little bit of both those worlds. Now, of course, you have a pyramid and there are a lot more practitioners than there are leaders. So in terms of just percentage of people doing work, you look at the people who have digital skills is a little higher at this point of time. I think Abhilash made a great point that there are so many more younger people in the, at any workplace at any point of time. So that does reflect in terms of where the money is spent. But if you look at, the total number of courses taken and the value of those courses, it's actually quite split between the two at this point of time. You have leaders coming down to learn digital skills, and you have the practitioners realizing that they have to learn these skills at some point in time, right? So money spent actually close to 50-50 per company.
Yeah, it's interesting, and this is again some data coming through from Mercer, Seher, and actually that talks about most in-demand skills for 2025, according to HR, at agile transformation, design thinking, entrepreneurship, whereas actually employees say that in the post-pandemic world, innovation, global mindset, and digital leadership will be most in demand. And Deloitte actually has a view on top human-rated capabilities being resilience, EI, empathy, and other highly rated capabilities, adaptive thinking, social intelligence, critical thinking, creativity, teaming. So interesting research, but again, as you made the point that clearly I've spoken to organizations where I think the pendulum is kind of swung from one to the other, and there's a lot of focus now suddenly on emerging tech, while the others haven't even got onto the bandwagon of emerging tech, and they continue in their old conventional way of what. And I'm not discounting the importance of leadership, but clearly that too has transformed, given how organizations have transformed. Let's move to our second act, which is really about true north learner engagement and intentional learning. I mean, again, there's been a lot of talk about intentional learning, and if you look at the data on intentional learning, majority of the workforce around the world is actually willing to take the responsibility of upskilling and reskilling. So they are saying we are willing to take the accountability and the ownership. All that really means is, can organizations create an environment of self-directed learning where employees can in fact take that first step? And L&D professionals, I mean, around the world, clearly this is an area of priority for them. Let me come to you, Santosh. To what extent are employees in your organization empowered to drive self-directed learning in line with their growth aspirations? And what are the learning solutions that you are offering, and how are they made accessible to employees?
So thank you for asking that question, Nisjay. And I must say that you did put some pressure on me by saying that I'm the learning specialist out here, but I must also say that, we have an eminent list of panelists out here, group of panelists rather, and I look forward to learning from all of you too as part of this discussion. Now, coming to your question, it's very interesting that you used the word empower, because we have developed a mobile application in HDFC for our employees, and it's called Empower. Okay, so we are trying to truly realize the potential of that particular tool. And the good thing is, there has been 95% of our employees who've actually accessed this mobile tool, so to speak. And one of the things that we were very cognizant about, and this was introduced in October 2020, and this is the time that I joined HDFC. I've been there for around 10 months now. And when I was talking to my colleagues, I think the focus really was on it being learner-centric. It is not about what the learning and development team thinks that we should provide for the learners, but truly understanding what they want to learn. And we've all been hearing about anytime, anywhere, learning, etc. So trying to stay true to that philosophy and making sure that the learning that they need in the moment is something that they will have access to. And we talked about, you alluded to learning in the flow of work. That is something that we are spending a lot of time on, and in fact, and a lot of data that we are using, or a lot of information that we are curating or gathering, is essentially based on understanding what the learners need. Because again, as I said, it's the learner who has to be at the front and center of everything that we do. We exist because there are learners, right? So at the end of the day, we have to cater to what they want. So even as we're building that, and about the LXP, you're aware of that, we're looking at all of this essentially because we also realize that this generation of learners, they are not waiting for a learning calendar to tell them when a particular learning program will be delivered to them, and they sit in an 8-hour classroom and there's only 10% of that they're taking away, and they feel that 90% of their time may not be exactly wasted, but is of no immediate or imperative consequence to them, so to speak. So it's trying to look at how we can understand what they need and deliver point solutions to them, if I have to use that particular term. So that is also becoming very important. And I like a point that Abhilash has made. And the key thing is, how do we make sure that what they learned can also be applied? What is the support that we can provide in helping them apply what they've learned? And for me, that is really truly empowering them, because otherwise we'll be just ticking the box and saying that we've delivered what we think they should learn, without focusing on how the learning is sustained, how it is applied. So again, for me, I think whatever we do, whether it's a mobile app that we have developed and which has been a big success in the organization, or looking at other tools or technologies, it all boils down to how accessible is it to them, how valuable is it to them. And for us as learning and development professionals, and this is something that I share with my team, and this is the last point that I'll make, and a limited one at that, is that we don't want to get enamored or inordinately enamored by what's going around in terms of trends and technologies. We really need to see what makes sense to our learners. And for me, if we recognize that, then we'll be truly on the path to actually and honestly empower the learners. I'll stop with that. Back to you.
Thank you, Santosh. So I just want to be a little provocative here. So what is different when we, has the L&D community woken up that ultimately they existed to serve the learner? When you say learner-centric, what are some visible shifts? Because, okay, so you've given them a mobile, and now, learning is accessible on the mobile, and just in time, and just enough, and just for me. And I'm exaggerating the point here just to identify some visible, prominent shifts that have occurred in the L&D way of working to empower the learner.
Okay.
What are some visible shifts?
So maybe just one or two, and I think that's a very valid question. Not really provocative, but I think that's a valid question that we all need to embrace and address. See, in every organization, I'm sure that all my eminent co-panelists will agree, questions being asked to the learning and development team in terms of what is the value that you're providing to the organization. We are making a lot of investment. We come with the L&D budget, etc. So when it comes to the question of value, one of the things that we need to be able to show to the organization, to the leaders, and to the business, and particularly the learners, is that not just the monetary investment, but also the time and effort invested is delivering value to the learners per se, which is then evident in the way that they do their work, that collectively contributes to their individual excellence, team excellence, and then correlated to the bottom lines, etc. So when L&D has been asked these hard questions, we had to find a way to answer it. Now, I may not be speaking for all the learning and development organizations, but at least from what I've experienced. So we had essentially we had to stand up and deliver, and we realized that if we thought in the traditional, conventional way, we're not going to have much of an uptake, right? We talk about push and pull, etc. And yes, I think gone are the days when we were using coverage metrics and bums and seats metrics, etc. Now people do not take learning seriously unless they see relevance to what they do, unless they find value or a return of investment or their time and effort in learning per se. So I think that has really challenged us to take the shift very, very seriously and constantly having to prove that what we are delivering is generating and delivering value. And I'm sure that in the latter part of the discussion, we'll be talking about metrics, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But, when we are able to show that, the pull factor is alive and true rather than the push factor that we focused on, that I believe will be the evidence of us, A, recognizing things have shifted, the ground has shifted, and B, the fact that we've been responsive adequately to the shift.
Thank you, Santosh, and thank you for granting me that liberty of not being provocative but being sensible and asking a question. Seher, I want to come to you and specifically talk about this duality of control versus democratization in the sphere of a keen and active and empowered learner. Can you hear me, Seher? Seher, can you hear me? Okay, we'll come back to Seher. Let me ask this question of Amit. Amit, so specifically, we talk about an empowered learner, a keen and active learner, and yet we talk about control because we do want some form of control and democratization. So this duality of balance. How do you tread that thin line there?
Yeah, so Nisha, what we have seen is that when it comes to this talent development, we find that today's millennial workforce primarily, they're extremely vocal about their expectations and they continuously seek learning opportunities to embrace their employability or enhance their employability. So organizations, I think also we have to quickly respond to such individualized demands, learning demands of this new age workforce vis-a-vis the earlier democratized approach that we are hinting at, and approach it through the confluence of what we say the education, entertainment, and enlightenment, the 3 E's that in my mind should be driving any learning agenda that we put together. So hyper-personalization and customized learning curriculum can cater to the employee's unique needs and preferences, which can also be aligned to the individual's career aspirations. And this is where we need to embrace those digital platforms and newer technologies to create that flexible career management kind of a framework, which is integrated with your blended learning experiences. And that's delivered through meaningful content in a manner that is entertaining, engaging, and contextual at the same time. So therefore, I think it's more and more our imperative that is coming up that we create this kind of a personalized experience around learning to make it more enriching and engaging experience. And by adopting more and more agile and self-directing kind of self-directed learning models. And technology will continue to keep playing a key role in this exciting journey by not only making it accessible, but also making it engaging for the users by utilizing, as you earlier mentioned, utilizing their inherent interest and styles.
Great. So a lot of points made there in that answer, Amit. Seher, I'm not sure how much can you hear us? Can you hear me?
I can hear you. I'm sorry, the system fluctuated and it threw me out. So I'm back.
No worries. So I'll be lenient with my question here. So is the L&D
don't be lenient, be tough.
Okay, then I can ask you a question. Is the L&D community afraid of giving up its control? As we look at democratization and the learner kind of choosing what he or she wants to learn, right. It seems that they are no longer in the driving seat, the learner is.
Absolutely. I don't think it's about control or anything. I think the L&D strategy is embedded in the people strategy and the business strategy, because at the end of the day, this is what differentiates an organization in the market. This is why people stay with you, because you can't compete dollar for dollar to your competitors, when the market gets hot. So So it's not about control. It's about really being sort of adding value to the business and being part of that sharper end of the people strategy. But
So is this newfound wisdom, or has this always been the case?
I think it's become much more clear in a post-pandemic world, to us of how critical this is. I mean, your L&D strategy has to be liberalized, democratized. At Mercer, we've always believed in that. We have a very virtual model. In the pre-pandemic days, people used to complain. They said, "What happened to that face-to-face learning? We want those classroom training." And when the pandemic happened, we were ready. We were future-proofed because it's scalable, it's efficient, it's self-managed, and yeah, I think this is wisdom that is truly relevant.
So we are in vehement agreement that the time is right, the learner is ready, organizations need to be ready, not the other way around. So
Absolutely.
because I still hear from a lot of companies that I speak with, I don't think our learners are ready. They're not mature enough for such a sophisticated environment, and is it premature? And I think to myself, well, they've been ready, you haven't, and
Right.
perhaps that's the reality and the writing on the wall.
So
That
we need to
stop
help them.
prejudging them.
Yeah, and we need to play a role here as managers, as organizations. And what I've been able to do in the last 2.5 years, coming up to 2.5 years at Mercer. I'm based out of Hong Kong, visiting my family in Pakistan at the moment. But basically what we've been able to do is create a lot of hype and energy around self-learning. So I have a monthly newsletter that I send out, and it's called Upskill for the Career You Love. And we have thematic things. Some months it's about building grit, another one could be hybrid models. And we have very relevant training that's on offer for the next 2 months. And it's a one-click access to our Workday Learning tool. Some people don't want to take the time out to go to Workday Learning. This gives you one-click access, and you can set yourself up for your learning map for the next couple of months.
Super. Music to my ears.
Great. Yes.
Let me ask you this question. Maybe we open this to the house. That where does the manager kind of fit in this new dynamic, right? 7 out of 10 talent developers actually reach out to the manager to support, to encourage their employees to learn and be active learners. And yet we see that a majority of people actually learn about learning interventions through email marketing. That's the tragedy. And obviously, the role of the manager may have, depending upon where you sit, changed post-pandemic. So what role should they and can they play in this new normal?
Yeah. I'll just say that managers have to lead by example. They have to show that they have the growth mindset and they're learning. And then they have to really basically rate people not just on what they deliver to the company, not just on their sort of tangible results, but also on their learning mindset. And that's how people should be promoted at the end of the day.
Okay, maybe I should have a follow-up question. Are you saying that managers still have a very important role to play as far as learning and development is concerned, or the aspirations of an employee, because they're all anyway going to go and learn, irrespective of whether the manager supports it or not? Is that fair to say, or are you saying no, the manager still has a very important role and they must participate in that regard?
I say the manager has a critical role, more important than ever. They are anchors to the system, and that has become even more important now. So you can have all sorts of people in your team, some that will learn, others that won't, but the manager has to set the gold standard.
Okay, Mohit, let me go to you. Do you agree with Seher? Is there a different point of view you have?
Oh, I surely have a different point of view. I think most managers, and older they get like me, tend to suffer from a hippo culture where you think that you know it all, including what the employee should be learning. I mean, companies are lucky if the company needs the manager thinking and the employee interest aligns. And that normally is only 20-30% of the company. And the rest of the company, either you end up in a force-fitted model where you try and fit the force fit the manager agreement and the company need, and force the learner to learn, and that's where the adoption is lower. So to me, I think there has to be a choice of topics which are relevant for the future and the present, and you let the teams figure out, or let the employees figure out what they want to learn, and make it freely available, which I think most of you are doing, most of us are doing equally. I think the measurement around it probably is how does it lead to better mobility, not so much input metric, but the output metric, and capability as depending on the purpose of the company. If it's around innovation or whatever else, productivity, could be anything for that matter, whatever the measure is, that how are people getting more capable, that is a better measure. And we've tried many things to say it doesn't matter, you go learn anything, we'll pay for it as far as you can come back and teach a few people. So as simple as that, right? So it doesn't matter, you may be a Java engineer, you're learning blockchain, and we may not have anything to do with blockchain for now, but it's okay. You go and learn and find 4 or 5 people who think that they want to learn blockchain, and maybe in the future it'll become relevant. So we've tried many of those experiments, they work quite well. So in my view, I think manager has a reducing role in deciding. Manager surely has a high responsibility. I agree with Sayar on the overall alignment of the career, but I don't think the manager has a deciding role, or even system should not have an approval angle of the story in the employee experience, because that's, to me, that's that's not a great experience where it's now waiting for manager approval for a particular training or some content you need to access, etc.
Yeah, so Mohit, probably you and Sarah agreeing at one level that clearly it's a different role. I don't know whether it's reducing or enhancing, but it's a different role that the manager has to play. The question is, where can the manager have the biggest impact, and in what capacity do they play that part? Right? Ultimately, they do have a role. Okay, let's agree on that. The question is how that role is different, how they participate. And in the current context, and this is probably an open question to the panel, do you see managers playing a passive defensive role currently, or you see them playing actually a negative role in terms of limiting what a learner can learn, or a supporting role in general? I know it's a general question, but where would you land the managerial population of today?
Okay, so let me take a stab at it, Nishay. And I'm going to disappoint you by not answering directly to your question, but that's okay, because I do have a couple of perspectives that I certainly want to share.
Please.
See, the first thing is we need to understand what the role of the people manager is and what constitutes their set of responsibility. And one key responsibility is certainly providing performance and development support. Okay, you cannot take that away from a part of a people manager's scope or role or responsibility per se. Now, by stating that, I'm not saying that it's all about approving the learning or a program that their team member needs to go to, because the world is changing. We have talked about democratizing learning, etc. So the controls are really not there in that sense. Okay, but I'm looking at it through the perspective of how a manager, even if the manager has to be selfish, can invest in her or his team members' development, because that's ultimately going to play out in generating better results for the organization that she or he is part of. That's number one. Number two, we talk about providing opportunities to apply learning, right? I mean, we all know about the forgetfulness curve. We all know about you either use it or lose it. Yeah, there are various factors at play here, but in my mind, at this point, and unless the world has changed drastically and I've been blind to it, I still think that the manager is in a good place. And I'm being very careful. I'm not saying the best place, but is in a good place to provide the opportunities for application of learning. So we really cannot, in a way, dilute the role of the manager per se, because we talk about on-the-job learning, right? And the manager is really involved in the on-the-job space. We cannot take that away. And also the aspect of feedback and coaching, even when it comes to application of learning, who is in a good place to provide that? There is the manager. So for me, it goes beyond approval of learning per se. And I think it also behooves us as HR and learning professionals to equip the manager be effective as a supporter of their people development, because I think it's going to help all of us, in a big way. That would be a few limited points that I have as to the criticality or the importance of the role of the manager per se.
Thanks. Yes, Abhilash.
Yeah, so I just thank you, Santosh, for sharing those thoughts.
I hope you're answering my question on where the
I'm answering your question. So let us be kind to the manager. Let us be little kind to the manager. Somebody who's managing people is facing the crisis, responsible for answering to the exco and the management committee and shareholders, and also trying to manage the expectation of the employees, colleagues, and teams that she is managing. Now, Anand is here. If you look at the learning is within the organization and outside the organization. While L&D teams, HR, practitioner, businesses are focusing a lot of stuff around what the organization needs today. But if you look at the data that is emerging on professional learning, people will do self-selection. So majority, I think 75-80% of the professional courses picked up from organizations like Simply Learn, or even for us, they are self-selected from the market, which means people are finding there's a gap which the organization is providing me, and I need to pick up some skills which are relevant, which I feel are relevant for me in the future. When I said let's be kind to the manager, I want the mancoms and the boards and the HR team to come and support the manager by including learning metric as part of the KRA. A manager can only measure, control what she is able to see as part of the performance metrics across the year. If sales performance, profitability, client experience, everything is part of the KRA, why can't there be a percentage of learning ability or learning efficiency as part of the KRA? Which means if I have to rate somebody, if I have a team of 10 people, how do my 10 people absorb, internalize and apply those learnings in the workplace? And I am, because directly monitoring them, I should be able to then just, but most often than not, learning interventions become part of the appraisal. After, okay, you did your appraisal best last year, you got an A+ rating, what do you want to learn now? That is post fact. It has to be part of the process given the KRA. So that's the reason I said, let's be kind to the manager and help her if you want her to control, supervise, empower, or even encourage learning in the organization.
And Nishay, because this is relevant to what Abhilash said, I'm just going to jump in a little bit here. So
yes, please.
Thanks to support what Abhilash just said. Of the learners who come to us, and again, hundreds of thousands of them who come to us, only 25% of them tell us that, hey, our manager told me that I should be learning something, or my organization actually funded my learning. 75% of them self-funded, completely doing this on their own. That's a very, very important data point. And the second part, I want to double agree with Abhilash. For the 25% that do come to us, these are organizations that have a learning culture, because we actually go deep and understand this. They have a learning culture, and for most of them, there are KRAs set around learning. So hard facts for you in terms of just large volumes of data, the managers and a lot of companies don't actually prioritize it. So it's great to talk about it. They don't today. Only 25%. By the way, that 25%, a majority of that percentage comes out of the US. In India, it's actually 10%. So I want to call out even more harder facts. So just calling it out, Abhilash is spot on in terms of what the market data actually says today. And I think there's a lot of work to be done.
So we have an enlightened learner is exactly the point that I think, as I said right at the beginning, 82% of the workforce globally, I don't know what the India stats on that number is, but I would imagine equally high, wherein they believe they are going to take the ownership. I mean, ultimately, so long as you don't come in their way, they're anyway going to get it done, one way or the other. And business says that about HR and learning. If you're not equipped to deal with the task, we'll get it done. Because clearly, skill gaps are the real business gaps, as I mentioned. So, speaking of learner engagement, clearly that's something that's extremely important for us. And clearly, there's this is one insight that I think we can leave the audience with. That most workplace learning happens in the first 3 days of the work week. So if you try sending an email or have your manager speak to your colleagues at the beginning of the week itself, it may actually increase the impact. And that, with that, we'll transition to our Act 3, where digital meets learning. Now, Mohit, this is really for you. The average large company has 11 core HR systems, be it in recruitment or payroll, or learning, reporting, compensation, communication platforms. And the overall spend on HR tech is several thousands of dollars per employee per year. Given these high spends, and HCM investments automatically kind of get classified as high risk projects, even though we know the utility and the importance of it. What would be your guidance as a group CTO on what does it take to drive a successful implementation and adoption?
So I think one is the prioritization itself, Nishay. To me, EX is as important as CX. Most of the companies, are spending a lot of time on reinventing the customer journeys, reimagining and digitizing the customer, which is important. Surely, that's where you make the money. But if you look at the triple bottom line getting realigned to people, planet, and profit, the people are the more important one, which as a part of the ESG agenda and many other, is getting prioritized. To me, EX is equally important. Hence, we have to look at it from an experience angle. There are lots of broken digital last miles where, if you look at a customer account opening process, normally you'll have, some tie up with Aadhaar, KYC, whatever else. And if it's employee process, then you want people to fill up a form, and hence the digital version there is to take a photo of the form or scan it and send it, and then I will issue you this corporate card or whatever else. And so lots of digitization is kind of tacky. Money is being spent, but it's not necessarily connected, and it's not designed for experience. And if you look at Gartner surveys, many other, nobody's really happy. If you look at employee survey feedbacks, do we have the right digital tools? Nobody's going to say they're happy. So one to me is, the employee journey to be recrafted fully, keeping the same spirit of what we do customer journeys with, which is to drive joy, to free up employee time for higher productivity. And that's why I was talking about approvals, that our learning approvals and leave approvals and many other approvals. With AI coming in, you don't need many of those. If it's quite normal, which is what I've been approving anyways, why ask my approval? The AI will approve it for you, and just keep going with it. So that's kind of one, in my view. I think in some ways, building, and I'm, for lack of better word, I'm using agile as a culture. Building agile as a culture to me is around equal share of voice. And in a particular squad, each squad member has a role, and the scrum master there in a squad is not necessarily the manager, but he's running the scrum and keeping things coordinated. I see the manager role to be similar in some way, who's keeping things coordinated so that we are able to, get done, and keep like a Kanban. You can say, I'm doing it. This, this is done. This will get done. 3 states of agile, where you are either doing it, or you've done it, or you will be doing it, and you do it on a weekly basis. And then the manager role become a coordinator, facilitator, coach, and an unblocker, where the manager is able to unblock it. Systems are not necessarily conducive of all this, and hence a redesign of systems around it, which includes HR systems as well. Largely, I would think HR systems, IT, finance and tax, corporate real estate, many of these have been designed originally for command and control and audit trail and budget calculation. They need to be redone fully, keeping the EX in mind, and freeing up the employee to be more productive and to live a better life, I would think, and be more creative and innovate more and collaborate more. Second, also, I think, is around collaboration and communication. While money has been spent already, and thanks to Teams and Zoom, 18 months have been productive. But I think it's not the end of the road, neither with the pandemic nor with the evolving hybrid model, which is here to stay. And I think the tool, the bit even now wanting, where you do want to simulate being in a room and using your post-its and designing your Kanbans and doing your design session. The tools are still wanting. So I think companies need to prioritize on collaboration, communication, whether it's one-to-one, one-to-many, or many-to-many. All three need to be equally invested. Currently, we are lopsided, either on one-to-many, where the boss is talking to, it's called a town hall, virtual town hall. All platforms have it, or you may have a one-to-one, which is a Teams chat or whatever else you do on WhatsApp, etc. But I think it is the collaboration platforms which are working better in the digital world. Not many companies have adopted it. I think if all those were to get probably done, the capability of the team, the collaboration across the silos, which all companies have, whether they're vertical or horizontal, doesn't matter, and then the ability to compete with disruption coming from all quarters, from expected competition and unexpected competition, owing to the tech firms are doing it a lot better. That makes you half capable of getting there now. And that's why I was trying to talk about learning earlier, where manager has a role to potentially facilitate some thoughts, but in the end, it is the interest of the learner which wins, at least in my view, which develops capability in the team.
Mohit, with specifically when you look at investments in HCM and the pegging order in an organization, right? So probably put sales right at the top of whichever function. Ultimately, where does it land? And within HCM itself, then learning. Because what we are seeing is many organizations continue with dated legacy, tech stack. And given what the pandemic has done over the last 2 years, I think it has made it more obvious the urgent need to re-equip yourself and focus on the learner and experience and personalization and the use of AI. But how many HCM systems are AI powered, or learning systems are AI powered today in the country? I mean, I'm just looking at the reality where clearly there's a big need that's established, but it's not getting the priority. And why is that the case?
I mean, in my view, Nishit, time is the only money I can think of, which we are short of. And hence,
so there's only that much that can be done.
Correct. Because availability of content is aplenty compared to when I was maybe learning 20 years ago, 25 years ago, when I started my learning journey, where the content was the issue. Now content is not an issue. All of us know it. That's available aplenty. Time is scarce, and people have to live lives too. That's been proven in the last 18 months. They are not married to the company to be spending 60 hours in a week at the company, for the company, at work. So any system which makes best use of time, whether it's through AI or aggregation or hyper-personalization, I think Amit spoke about it already, N is equal to 1, where my Spotify list has to be different from my wife's list. My morning running list has to be different from my evening meditation list. And Spotify is telling me, not that I'm telling Spotify. I think learning is going to get there, that what my weekend learning has to be different. My morning learning has to be different. I think you talked about Josh's comment around learning in the flow of work, but the flow of work depends on how intensely I'm trying to solve a problem, and at that point, what am I looking at, etc. So I think the classical models of a learning Friday half day, or trying to get to 40 hours learning in the year as your target, and then doing it in the Christmas because that's when most of the offices are closed, is kind of not working, because it does not lead to any capability. I think somebody already mentioned. So to me, I think it's a mix of all that. If you can make time available to people, free up their time, and that's why, like I was saying, the rest of the EX has to be modernized too, so that I have time to do my job very well, and also learn, attached to my job as well as attached to my future job and my interest, all three. And my interest can be different from my future job.
Is it painful in terms of switching cost? Because clearly, once you've got in a tech platform, a system.
Not necessarily, because you originally started by saying companies are spending lots of money on HCM, maybe not at the right place. So you answered the question already.
It's not
so much.
It's not so much the switching. When I talk about cost, actually, it's more the pain than the cost, because most probably you're tied into a contract which is
that's one
yeah.
time. That's one time. And to me, you need to engineer an outstanding employee experience through the life cycle.
Let me ask this question, and maybe ask this of Anand and you both. Is it because the HR community isn't well versed with what's available, what tech can work with experience? Is that part of the reality in not kind of spearheading and taking this right upfront to boards and management to say, this is what you need to do for employee experience. This is how it can improve work-life balance. This is how it can improve productivity. This is how it can actually improve nutrition.
Yeah, Nishay, I won't be able to speak for L&D, but I can tell you that the unfair advantage that a simply learned holds, I can tell you that part of it, right? Which I think it'll be very hard for L&D to keep up with, is my 2 cents on this. And again, I'm the Maverick, so I'll give you sort of that perspective. I have 125 people engineering team working on the problem. I would like to know which L&D team would have 125 people engineering team working on the problem. It is possible, but it's extremely rare. That's the first statement. So I'll go back to what Mohit said, right? While content is really, is available and is available to everybody, solving deep tech requires engineering resource, takes cost. And the question is, for a company, is this a problem worth solving? And we found that most companies will say, I don't have the budget and this is not important, and I'm picking out of the 5 things I want to do with my engineering team to solve the problem. So the unfair advantage that we hold as an edtech disruptor is that we have tech available in a magnitude of order higher than most companies. And hence we're able to solve this problem. Now, whether L&D, there are L&Ds who do this, I'll let maybe Mohit answer that question, but we do enjoy a significant advantage because we have that kind of tech budget and investment.
Yeah, and I would agree with Anand, Nishay. This is all available in the last 2-3 years. So I don't think we should be beating any L&D professional about have they woken up now, or this is all very new. And the advantage that much of this is available in the SaaS model,
correct,
which is software as a service, where you don't need to necessarily engineer all this yourself. You need to select the one which suits your organization, which can do aggregation of content aligned to your learning needs, etc. It's available. I mean, on subscription model. And to your original question, I don't think it's a large CIO, upfront commitment. It's pay as you go, and the success will tell, right? I mean, if it leads to better capabilities, fine, you're on the right platform. Else, probably switch. The other thing is that you can go from Amazon Prime to Netflix, kind of with the same movie very soon, etc. as well.
No, it's a fair point. It's absolutely a fair point. I think the world has moved and very rapidly, and there's an explosion, especially in the HCM space, learning space, in terms of tools and tech. Just to keep up with that and understand what is available. I mean, there are thousands and thousands of applications and new softwares that are bubbling mushrooming every day. But the only point I was making, it has to become a key priority for the HR and L&D community to leverage and embrace tech, because that's what the LHI survey also shows you. It's the weakest link, and 2 years in a row. So you can't continue to say it's 2-3 years old. I mean, one day is too much given the business reality, right, that we are a part of. Okay, I want to transition and move to our fourth act. And Amit, this is to you. So clearly, I think one is to continue with a 5% increase or a 10% increase in your budget, or perhaps even in unfortunate organizations or circumstances where the budgets are decreasing. I mean, all businesses aren't flourishing. What is your advice? I mean, if we had to prepare a business case where we want 5 times the budget, where we compete with a equally important priority in terms of spend within an organization, what would that conversation in that boardroom look like?
Yeah, so see, we know that in today's networked and symbiotic business world, so talent is any capability today. It's across the employee continuum. It's no longer our direct workforce that we have always perceived talent to be. It can be indirect workforce. It can be internal or external resources, whoever, in my mind, can create an economic value for the enterprise. That's talent for us today. So when it comes to investment in their learning and development, we have to look at that expanded employee continuum when we are looking at future investments and ROI or VOI, whatever you call it. Okay, coming out of that. So talent, so I think we have to get a sense of this incremental economic value due to the L&D investments that we make. And we need to take more and more of an outside-in approach while trying to have a business buy-in for these disproportionate investments that we need to make on L&D. Now, we need to help the business leadership. When you say we, the HR professionals and the L&D professionals thereof, we have to help the business leadership deploy that right approach to capture the changes in the marketplace, the changing customer preferences, which they are aware of, and deploy a design thinking framework to develop a much deeper understanding of the future success measures for the business. Now, what we need to do simultaneously is work on these expectation gaps from the business stakeholders and also the capability gaps in the organization to cater to the specific needs of these business stakeholders. And that's the way to get a sure buy-in of these business folks. So we must use design thinking principles to kind of co-create the business case that we are talking about for investments in L&D, and keep asking questions like, what's the expectation of my customer from me? Do I have the current capability to deliver that expectation? What are my capability gaps and how do I bridge it? So we are all aware of the much talked about this, the Donald Kirkpatrick model, which is in way of work from the early 1960s on this effectiveness and ROI that we have tried to derive out of the L&D investments. And enough debates have happened since then on the 4 measurement levels, which we're all aware of, the reaction, learning, behavior, and results levels. If you remember, in the mid-1980s, there was a highly disruptive thought by another training and development guru whose name was Bob Pike, who essentially posed the question, what if we turn the 4 levels, this model, upside down? And Kirkpatrick was initially very hesitant to this suggestion, but later on he came around with this idea. So when you first begin the results, begin with the results of that level that we're talking about, most organizations that seek for the results, the outcome, there's an element of consistency that surprises no one. So regardless of what the strategic initiatives happen to be, there is the starting point of measuring the results of L&D investments, actually takes the cake away. So literally,
what is missing then? Why is it continuing to be a weak link? Is it data paucity? Is it our ability to use that data to make better decisions? Why are we not, as a community, being able to garner more resources?
I think instead of trying to look at the ROI approach, Nishchay, to get a buy-in on the L&D investments, I think organizations have to more and more, we have started adopting a different way to show the impact, which is on VOI in my mind, which is value on investment. And VOI is a collation of many data points. Some may be financial and some may be in intangible benefits as well.
Yeah, actually, I was not referring to the ROI in the classic Phillips model. So that's not the intention. The intention is you can have tangible and intangible benefits. Yeah. So long as, for example, Gianni in the morning, he spoke about redeployment. Because of having a learning skilling ecosystem, are you able to redeploy talent faster? Are you able to reduce the cost of training because you've adopted better technology, better systems, scale it? Are you able to reduce attrition? Is part of the reason why people leave your organization, because they don't get relevant learning opportunities for either learning new skills or applying them. Is it improving the success of digital transformation? That every organization is going through digital transformation and you're lacking the skills to begin with, your success rate is hampered, right, in terms of what you will achieve. Or is it higher engagement, which is higher productivity? Now, it is or even building a culture, which is growth and resilient, equipped and oriented. So I don't believe, ultimately I will come to Abhilash and ask him what he's seeing in terms of what are people measuring at the end of the day. What are we putting forth as a business case in today's world? And why is it that we're always stuck? Either, we feel happy coming away with a 5% increase in budget, or it remains the same and we say, bach gaye. So question is, what is not happening today, and why is that the case?
So, Michelle, let me tell you. So, whatever the metrics that we decide to select in any business, one universal necessity is to baseline the current state. So, without a baseline, it will be very hard to show that improvement, or what I was talking about, the VOI.
Yes.
And it may sound very elementary, but it is surprising to know that when we get to know about how many global Fortune 500 organizations, if they fail to meet this basic requirement. Okay, so for example, in Giants Group, for example, what we are doing, we ensure that we always co-create the differentiated learning model with the business stakeholders. It's a co-creation process. And that's the only way we can entail varying degrees of learning opportunities and investments to achieve the right VOI, and which is driven by a clear, tangible dashboard success measures, like incremental, you mentioned about incremental retention of our top and critical talent, the savings in replacement cost and time, the talent buy versus talent build decisions, and also the improved return on productivity, which we say ROIP, the return on improved productivity through the incremental investments in technology-enabled integrated learning and development platform.
Super. Abhilash, so what's your experience in what is being measured versus what ought to be measured? What is currently being measured when you speak to organizations?
So once you start treating learners as consumers, I think the basic metrics that we all love to at times measure is course completion rates, participation rates. These are standard metrics that we do. Frequency of completion, are learners satisfied? So feedback surveys that we do, which are at that point in time that after I completed the course. But what happens that we don't measure or track. So what we do is mostly track the learner satisfaction at that point in time. Do we go back after 6 months, 12 months and see how she has implemented and see the satisfaction level? Then I don't think it has been tracked or measured. Anything has been thought about that. Then is learning engagement matrices that, of course, which our own platform, NSC Knowledge, which resides on Edcast, is there are matrices that we see and we measure them. Organizations today are looking at, and what they want to do is, how do we connect learning to data to business outcomes? Is there a correlation we can establish? Is there a tangible evidence we can create? And I think since learning, and we all have experience now that while one part of learning is individual, the other part of organizational learning is the collective wisdom. We all learn in groups. Getting groups to act on certain cases, use cases, certain experiences builds the learning experience much more richer, enhanced, and deeper. So is there a case wherein cohesiveness of teams during the learning process has continued after they implemented the project became successful, learning was there? Is there a way we can improve the cohesiveness of teams after learning journey has been complete? That's one thing I think could be measured, and there's enough data that is available through the data layers that we have on the LXPs and LMSs today that can give that. Second is shared knowledge. Is the measurement of shared knowledge being done? As I think one of the panelists in the initial said, I'm happy to support you, go and learn something, come back and share with the organization. Is there a concept of shared knowledge at all? If 75% of people are going and learning themselves, can they be encouraged to come back and share and have a collective shared knowledge in the ecosystem? That's I call the organization's IP. And that IP is collective, which should be protected, nurtured, and developed and invested in, because once that starts to fragment, it will go out. I think that's something which could be measured. Then is, I think I was noting a point, is L&D and HR rewards and recognition process, which can improve engagement levels. So while you look at engagement at that point in time, as we say, just-in-time measurement, but is there a long-term process in which HR processes, learning and development, rewards and mechanisms, something which I said was, and we got support, was including in the KRA, is it something that can be measured year and year over a period of time? And we see that graph going up, that these rewards, recognitions, this championing of the cause of learning, making the employee appear as an expert, making the employee have an aspiration to be seen as subject matter expert with certain skills, and championing the cause for others to follow. Is there a measurement of that can be done? I think that is what organizations are looking for. And as I said, today the data layers available with us, the analytical tools available with us, it is just about putting the right intention to put it together and trying to interpret it. it is all available with us.
Thank you, Abhilash.
Could I just add a perspective? I just thought Abhilash made some excellent points on measurements. I just wanted to add one at a very simple level. An organization is successful if there's two strategies: to buy your talent, to build your talent. If you can be the organization that builds your talent, you will have closed your succession gaps, and you wouldn't have to go out into the market every time somebody leaves. That's the true value of the true measure of if you are really using the value of your L&D strategy as well.
Great. So multiple perspectives in terms of the value that L&D can generate. And Amit coined value-added investment or value of investment. Clearly, as one, because value is basically in the eyes of the stakeholder, defined in the eyes of the stakeholder. So depending upon whether you're a CHRO or a CLO or a business lead or an employee, ultimately that value is defined very differently. Very interesting question that came up. And on a lighter note, how do you get the CF to sign the bill? So ultimately, money does matter. And this is all sweet talk unless you don't put ink to paper and approve a course, right? And my friend Anand probably faces it every day. That clearly, it's important, but look here, we don't have the money right now. Questions? So many questions coming.
I was going to say exactly the opposite. I think this is where I have a small advantage that I've never questioned about should we do the programs or not. But I can absolutely imagine how it's difficult for an L&D leader to actually make the case to actually have money to create a tech team and a curriculum team that can actually deliver to the grand visions that absolutely I think most leaders have, right? So I was vehemently agreeing with what you said.
Super. Maybe we should give you a more challenging job then. Okay, how do we retain a team such that competitors don't take away our team members? I mean, I guess in that sense, this goes back to the theory, right? Why should we invest in our people? Because they become more valuable. And if they become more valuable, then they get poached. So how do you reconcile that dilemma?
Well, I think you actively have career conversations with your people and you give them career plans and say, what would you like to do 1 year from now, 3 years from now, 5 years from now, and chart their career journeys and create a learning plan around it. People don't leave companies where they know they're going to grow. They leave when they don't see a future ahead.
And so isn't this I think, a dilemma in many ways that we've seen a lot of growth in India, right? A lot of growth in India. I mean, in the last 2 decades, organizations have grown manifold. But continuously, if you look at the attrition analysis, people always cite leaving an organization for better career advancement and growth opportunities, right? How do you reconcile that? Are you saying that, again, the managers are not being able to have that conversation, or people aren't seeing that growth as organizations see it and witness it, witness in terms of financial terms? What's the missing piece again here?
Is that for me?
I can probably add, since I was violently agreeing with Sarah, I'll just add a couple 2 cents here, right? My view of actually the delta that I see here is I think most leaders and managers realize that learning is important, and to some extent the end of that as well. But to just build on what Sarah said, right? See, I think most learners or most employees leave the culture, and if they see that the learning they've had is applicable to something that's happening in 2 years, wonderful, it's going to work out for you. But a lot of managers, and even my organization, I coach leaders on this quite a bit. If a manager is not having a proactive conversation about here is your learning path to achieve specific milestones in your career, if that career doesn't span at least the next 2 or 3 years, then it's a complete failed learning path, right? And what I found is naturally, not everybody naturally figures this out, and there's a lot of leadership coaching required to have managers understand that there is a career path, that there's a learning path to support that career path. That's missing.
So let me add a perspective here, Nischay. So we are talking about attrition, and we talk about, hey, investing in this person, and this person leaves. And there was a recent report, right, about Cognizant being a leadership factory, etc. I'm sure that you guys read in the newspaper. So whatever we try, there's only so much we can do to ring fence our talent. So while we focus and invest a lot of our efforts in retaining talent, I would also look at how learning can be a differentiator, even when it comes to attracting talent. Yes, we lose, but there's also opportunity for us to get great talent. So I think I wouldn't be fatally attracted to worrying about losing talent, because ultimately we will use. There is a certain percentage. There's no organization which can say that they've got zero attrition. I mean, that utopian stage has not been reached. So I think the focus for me would be is what can I do to create a platform that will attract people because they have growth opportunities that is supported by solid and robust development.
Okay, so I guess there's no argument against investing in people. I mean, otherwise we'd have probably gone back to the drawing board to have this conversation.
Yeah.
Okay, here's another interesting question. Given how important learning and development is, why is it the first area for budgetary cuts when there is a crisis?
Great question, and it's so true. It happens all the time. Yes, and I lost my budget. I had a high potential program, and I lost my budget in the pandemic, and I had to be creative and do it with zero budget. And I leveraged internal thought leaders to make it happen. And you're right. I think it is money that needs to be embedded in the P&L and not taken away. I mean, that needs to be there.
Data shows that whenever there's a crisis in the global markets, the admissions for professional learning programs increase during that period. So what Seher has just mentioned is that it's like the capital will flow where the opportunity is. So the intellectual capital also goes where the learning opportunity is. If the organization is not committing time, resources, they will pick it themselves. And there is ample data available, even for MBA programs, which are part-time programs, in addition to short-term professional programs. People start investing more because they see there is uncertainty in the market. We should be better equipped if we lose our job tomorrow. And that's a bigger risk for attrition.
Let me end with one question and open to all here. What's the boardroom sentiment on learning and development in terms, or management sentiment on learning and development? What are the conversations that you people have been part of that are different from the conversations you were having earlier? Is there an urgency? Are you being pushed as much in terms of we need to act and act really fast? What are the conversations?
I think leadership, talent, and skill sets, learning is only an enabler. I think that's always a boardroom discussion. And the way to get there is through learning. And I would agree with, I think Abhilash was saying, that if it becomes cost of revenue or cost of product in how you stack your cost, then learning is just essential break, similar to many other things, like
So
infrastructure in some way.
Are you hearing that skill gaps are the real business gaps? I mean, are they saying the business is hurting because we don't have
yes,
we don't
because
have these skills, so we can't start with them?
Yes, because you're losing talent as well as losing the competition to companies which are more capable because of skills.
Right.
And that's very clear versus how it was a bit earlier.
Yeah, I mean, pre-pandemic, I wouldn't imagine that would have been a front and center conversation.
Yeah.
In the boardroom or in management executive meetings, but clearly now, given the direct impact it has on business, and there's research to suggest, right, how much of revenue or bottom line you can unlock just by having the skills, having them.
Yeah.
Just the presence of those skills. Later, what you do with it is obviously equally important, but just not having them is a big detriment to business.
Yeah.
Any closing thoughts?
Yeah, I think skills are the new human currency, and we need to invest in it. It is what future-proofs careers. All of us, and have changed. I've changed careers in my life, gone from a corporate banker to an HR leader. We change our careers once or twice in our lives, and we need the skills to be able to do it for longevity.
That's a brilliant speech for the Emmy Awards, right?
Yeah. I would say amen to what Meher has said, and to the point about the boardroom conversations, etc. Particularly in the services industry, skills are definitely, I would use the word, hot currency. Okay, so the ask of the boards really is not about upskilling. It is about future skilling. What is going to future proof us? What is going to help us stay ahead of competition, stay ahead of curve, to lead and not to lag? So I think that's where the focus is, and I'm saying this because I would say I'm part of the oven, so to speak, because just a couple of weeks we had a meeting with the chairman of the HDFC Bank board, and there was a lot of interest in learning and development.
Great. Thank
I
you,
just have one
Santosh.
thought here. Sorry, I'll just take 1 minute. Is that the challenges that we as HR community or L&D community is facing? I think it will be very, very apt for the future if the higher education system starts building those business skills right at the college and university level itself. What we talk about soft skills today is not exactly soft skills. It's not away from a normal professional skill. It's a professional skill. Nothing soft. It's business skill. Customer service orientation is part of the service industry. It's a skill. I mean, while you talk for a tech expert to be softer skill, for customer service person, it's the basic life skill, employability skill. If we can start connecting that dot from college, university, higher education to enterprising in 5 years' time, we will not be having this conversation. Why skills are required? Because they are embedded into the school system, college system, and employees can be ready. Then the organization can take the onus of building the culture, vision, mission in those already future-ready employees who are coming there. That's my closing thought.
So one unified system of skill taxonomy from the day you're born till you die, right? Wouldn't that be wonderful? Amit, Mohit, Anand, any closing thoughts?
I have a slightly, if you may, morbid thought, and everybody's giving so many positive thoughts that I'm feeling a little uncomfortable saying it, but I'll say it anyway. So I think, just experientially and data-driven sort of viewpoint from Sunderland's perspective. We work with a lot of corporates that do their, training, and we actually help L&Ds actually succeed. I'll tell you something that we've seen as a pattern. The pattern is that wherever L&D partners with their business counterparts, and wherever L&D senior leadership is involved in these programs, we have exceptional outcome rates.
Yeah.
We have exceptional engagement rates, exceptional learner retention rates, right? And then we have a majority of the companies, I would say that 70-80% of the companies that come to us, there's a L&D, person that comes to us and says, I want to run this program, it's tactical, it's done, and it's finished, right? And unfortunately, those are not very successful. So I'll leave a slightly parting thought of success. One, if you're trying to do it alone and you think it's going to be done by some person who has no context of business, think again, it's not going to work. And I see examples of this every single day. And the second is, if L&D is struggling with some of the challenges of technology and things like that, there are partners, and these models work amazingly well, and we have done these things with a lot of enterprises, right? Think beyond the box, right? Think beyond what your team can achieve and think of how, not necessarily simply learn, but any of these partners can actually augment your staff and your abilities to do these things. So I think two, sort of parting thoughts in this case.
Great. Thanks, Anand. Mohit, anything? Amit, any parting thoughts before we conclude?
Yeah, I think the new form of agility in the business world today will no longer be about the survival of the fittest, which we have all been speaking about for so many decades, but survival of those who can readapt the fastest. And that's where the investments in learning and development will continue to happen. So if I have to conclude by taking a pick in what Alvin Toffler said, the illiterate of the 21st century will not be those who can't read and write, but those who won't be able to learn, unlearn, and relearn. I think that's where the significance of consistent learning and development will have its, sunshine in the industry world of business.
Okay, with that, thank you, ladies and gentlemen. That's a wrap on our prime time panel discussion on intelligent skill building in the new normal. Thank you, Mohit Kapoor, Amit Das, Abhilash Mishra, Anand Narayanan, Santosh Cherian, Seher Ahmed. For the audience, please join back at 5 p.m. for our masterclass on impact and measurement.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Great
Bye.
discussion. Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye.